If you've ever picked up a controller and then sat across from this title screen, you'll know that this Zelda is a little bit of an enigma compared to its predecessors. It's not colorful and spirited like Wind Waker or Ocarina, but it's also nowhere near as ominous or unsettling as Majora's Mask. It sort of sits in the middle because it provides just as many heartwarming moments as it does grim and foreboding ones. Which I guess would explain the title of the game and the whole opening dialogue about how Twilight is this magical time when light and dark are together, and some other stuff about loneliness. And thank God I was in middle school when this came out, because 12-year-old me absolutely worshipped this game. When we weren't watching Naruto or listening to one of these two bands, my friend Jack and I were playing and replaying this game for the better part of about a year. And when you're in that transition between being a kid and being a teenager, nothing makes sense, especially when you're trying to come to terms with a new school, a new town, being hours away from all your friends, and your parents divorcing. There were some dark times for me personally in 6th and 7th grade, and if you've ever been a preteen, I'm sure you've got some pretty gloomy and awkward memories of your own. 13 years later, when I think back to Twilight Princess, you'd expect that I would fondly remember the triumphs of the game, since they would have been such an escape from my prepubescent stresses. Defeating Zant, winning that epic jousting match on the Bridge of Eldin, using a chicken as a paraglider, Twilight Princess had some remarkably uplifting moments, and I remember them all fondly to be sure. But the memory that comes rushing back when I think of this game is not one of the heart-swelling heroic moments. If anything, it's probably the lowest point of Link and Midna's journey. When I think of Twilight Princess, I think of Midna's desperate hour. To this day, Midna's Desperate Hour is not just my favorite moment of Twilight Princess, it's one of the most striking sequences in a game I've ever played. To set the scene, if you've never played, or if it's just been a while, you just collected the third and final fused shadow from the Water Temple. It was a tough dungeon, so you're feeling pretty good about beating it, and you're eager to go take down Zant. But after you're teleported to the spring and Link turns to make his way out, you find that Zant has come to you. Wasting little time, he re-envelops the world and Twilight takes the 3 fused shadows you've worked the whole game for, turns you back into a wolf permanently, and then lifts the Twilight from the world, leaving Midna in an unfavorable state that mortally wounds her. That's a wildly oversimplified summary of what happened, but I'll spare you the lore. I recommend playing the game to get the full context. All of these things leave Link and Midna battered, broken, and defeated. The Lake Spirit instructs you to go find Princess Zelda because she's the only one that can help. And for the first time in a Zelda game, for me at least, I genuinely felt hopeless. It's late at night and the city streets are soaked from the pouring rain. You're in your wolf form, so none of the humans will help. People are afraid of you. They don't understand what's happened. And so you really don't have a safe place to go. As you run around, you can hear Midna quietly struggling to breathe, clinging desperately to life until you can find a way to get to Zelda. All of this over some of Toru Minegishi's best work, a song you've been listening to called Midna's Lament, which perfectly captures the desperation and sadness of the scene. It's dark, and the stretch from when you are teleported to Hyrule Field to when you find Zelda is not short, so you can't really speed through it. Twilight Princess methodically breaks your momentum and demands that you fully come to terms with the gravity and despair of the situation. So, that section is a huge downer, right? I mean, there's nothing revolutionary or remarkably noteworthy about it other than the soundtrack, which I may or may not have mischievously downloaded from YouTube to my MP3 player once or twice back in the gap. But in reality, this section is not unlike other scenes in games and movies that take a break from the plucky and the triumphant to slow down and make you feel for the character and what they're going through. I don't think many would argue that breaking a character for the sake of humanizing them and making them more relatable is a bad thing. And there is no doubt that the defeat humbles the hero and makes their later triumph all the more fulfilling. But I want to take a closer look at the sentiment that these types of moments create, the psychology behind the emotion that fills our hearts and our minds when we see our heroes battered and bruised. And we'll focus on Midna's desperate hour as the example here because there is something special that happens in our minds when we drive the story. The sadness changes how we play the game. Imagine this. You've just been given a series of mentally challenging tasks, word problems, puzzles, math calculations, enough to keep you busy for quite some time. Now, here's the twist. You don't have to finish all of them, just go as long as you can until you feel like quitting. I don't actually have problems for you to work on, but answer me this. Hypothetically, do you think you'd finish more if you were in a positive mood or a negative one? What mood do you think most people would have more success in? It's an interesting question because it boils down to in what mood are people most likely to endure? According to hedonistic discounting theory, sadness is actually a much stronger motivator than happiness. In a study by Goldenberg and Forgas in 2012, when happy and sad participants were asked to persist at a cognitively demanding task as long as they liked, those with a negative mood persevered more. Not only that, but they spent more time on the tasks, attempted more questions, and had more correct answers. It seems that sorrow sharpened their focus and gave them a reason to keep trying. And if we look at Midna's desperate hour and the way it brings sorrow into the story and therefore into the player's psyche, we can see that falling from this victorious moment to this tragic scene will only fuel the player's desire to press on and stand firm. In your heart, you want to be strong for Midna if you are invested in the story, but in your mind, you are cognitively driven to play more carefully and persist. It's really important to note that there was no prize or award for performing better in that 2012 study. Those experiencing negative affect simply believed that doing better held a higher hedonistic value. In other words, those who were in a sad mood placed a much higher perceived value on future achievement than those who were in a happy mood. And that is hedonistic discounting theory. There is this disparity in how much one imagines their future accomplishment will matter, subject to that person's mood. And it makes sense if you imagine yourself during these emotions. If you are feeling cheerful, anything you do from this point on may or may not bring you the same happiness that you have right now. But if you're feeling low, you are looking for something to remedy that emotion, something to cheer you up. And so anything you can manage to accomplish will mean much more to you than if you were feeling happy. And to me, this research echoes that age-old saying, once you've hit rock bottom, the only way to go is up. And so after Link and Midna come crashing down, up is the direction you head. Motivated to remedy the sadness, you play much more thoughtfully, more intently. Reaching the conclusion of the story simply means more now. According to a study by Bless and Fielder in 2006, negative mood also reduces one's reliance on pre-existing knowledge, such as scripts, traits, and stereotypes. You'll feel less of a need to rely on your items from your human form or Midna's powers, which is a good thing because you won't have access to either for a good chunk of time. Since you are less likely to refer to scripts of how events usually play out, you may no longer feel the need to engage into combat with enemies like you normally would. In this context, you may avoid them altogether because beating them won't really help you here. And above all, your motivation to heal the heartache of the story and complete this section is much stronger. The perceived value of winning is now much greater than usual, all thanks to that sadness. And so you can see that when we drive the story, a sorrowful scene is much more than a plot device to help us empathize with the characters. It's a powerful spark that will give us the psychological drive to persevere and to seek to actively remedy those feelings. It takes what could be a passive story and draws us in close as a cognitively resolute participant. A story of retribution becomes our story of retribution. And to me, this is one of the most compelling aspects of video games. Games don't need a story, but a story can truly blossom when it's in the form of a game. The emotions we experience as we watch these characters grow dynamically affects the gameplay and vice versa. Now, don't get me wrong, Nintendo probably wasn't trying to implement hedonistic discounting theory in this game or any of their games, but I do believe this moment and others are so powerful for the reasons I just mentioned. Or maybe I'm reaching, maybe it's not that complicated. Maybe it was just that deliciously moving music, or the fact that this was the first time I had ever seen my partner from a Zelda game in peril. Either way, Midna's Desperate Hour will always hold a special spot in my heart. It came at a time when I personally needed it most, and it taught me that when everything falls apart around you and you hit rock bottom, to endure. Because after all, the only way you can go next is up. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. There is a ton of research on negative mood that didn't make it in here, but I'll post a link to the full meta-analysis in the description. I genuinely recommend that you check it out because it has changed the way I view sadness. Positive mood and negative mood both have their functions, and it's all part of a balance. So if you struggle with mental health or know someone who does, definitely go take a look. Huge shout out to my boy, the Thesaurus, for all the synonyms for the word sad. That made making this a lot easier. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.
Hehehe